Thank you very much, Nikos, and thank you everybody here in the Spatial Audio Gathering to having me here and presenting my project here as a paper presentation. I would like to use this occasion to present my doctoral artistic research project that's still an ongoing project, which is called Moving Sound Choreography-Inspired Approach to Spatial Electroacoustic Composition. And I will briefly tell you who I am, what I do, how I do, and why I do. So this relates quite much to the artistic research, different kind of projects that we have been seeing and hearing about here already yesterday and in some of the presentations. So my name is Otto Iivari, and I'm a third-year doctoral student. I'm from Finland, and I study in the Estonian Academy of Music and Theatre. And I am an electroacoustic composer, and I compose acousmatic music, which means that most of my composition and pieces are intended to be played through different types of loudspeaker setups. But now that we have so many specialists here today, I don't need to go too deep in explaining electroacoustic and acousmatic music. Spatial audio technologies and the experience of spatial audio is something that it's very close to me in my practice, because most of the pieces that I compose utilize some of these technologies. And through these technologies and experiences, I have developed also a great interest for the art of choreography. A little bit about the spatial and the electroacoustic, what I mean. If we talk about spatial music or spatial electroacoustic or acousmatic music, there's one definition that I like to use, that spatialized music or spatial music is music with quasi-spatial structure defined by the composer in the score or in another medium of sound coding. And this is by American musicologist Maja Trochimchuk from his article in 1993, where he is actually talking about acoustic music, but I think that this definition still holds quite well to define spatial music. Instead of going too deep into the context and the history of electroacoustic music, I'm interested in looking a little bit of in my literature review, different kind of conceptualizations of space before I go to explain my own ways how to do it. So from the historical point of view, when I'm not so interested in going through that what kind of technologies have everybody used in their composition, but here's few examples. For example, from Edgar Varese, conceptualized space as fourth dimension, and he was already then talking about sound masses and different kinds of movements. And we have Nikos here, who conceptualizes space through aural microspace, and John Tien, Natasha Barrett writes about spatial tangibility, and so on. So we have a lot of these kind of different how composers have conceptualized space in this context. A little bit of background about my own project. I was introduced to spatial audio in the end of my bachelor studies, which is quite new to me in a way. And this process was always visual for me, so there was always this kind of visual kind of interface where I was seeing the dots and I was moving the sound within these. And this always was very, in a way that there was some kind of connection with the choreography. I was always thinking that there's something similar there, and this connection didn't leave me alone. And I started looking at dance theory, and I've been looking at the work of early 20th century dance theorist Rudolf Laban, and his approaches to movement analysis and different kind of concepts about space and movement. And during my exchange period in Institute of Elektronische Musik und Akustik in Graz, I was already then working on a piece called Weightless, and I was going through these different kind of effort elements that Laban had and what Laban was using in his work. And I wanted to continue and to explore this same topic in my doctoral studies. Now, research question-wise, how can the study of human movement inform and inspire the approaches in the context of electroacoustic music. And of course, to answer that kind of question, I have to embark on a journey to conduct artistic research. And my understanding of artistic research is very Nordic, Scandinavian, and it's based on this idea that a form of research in which artistic practice itself is the central method and site of knowledge production. And the artwork is the primary way in which questions are posed, explored, and answered. This is by Hannula, Vadén, and Suoranta. I'm also having a case study research methodology, which I think that oftentimes we kind of overlook that term, because case study research is something that's very well defined in different kind of fields of social studies, ethnography. But in this case, that I want to use the framework of Creswell and Poth from social studies, that I have a bounded system with clear limits such as specific time, place, group, or situation, and multiple sources of data to build a rich and detailed understanding of the case. And these can include interviews and observations, and documents and reports and audiovisual materials. And these eventually lead to case assertions, which are the key conclusions and interpretations about the case. How? I have an existing practice in my composition practice, and I change something in my composition by immersing myself into the theory and practice of another art form that shares the movement phenomenon, and see what kind of new possibilities I find. And I try to adopt the findings to my own composition process. And I critically reflect and communicate the process and the results. So in my case, I have two case studies. I have a piece called acousmatic composition called Diagonals, and the input in this case study is the Laban space harmony and the diagonal movement scale. And these are used as this kind of conceptual guides to inform the spatialization of sound objects. And in the second case study, Zoetrope, I'm conducting this kind of movement session with two dancers, and they are reacting to different materials that I want to use in my composition. A little bit about the process itself. I like to explain these 5 steps of my process, which are the preparation, gathering material, transformation, organization, and spatialization. And when I have these 5 steps here, then I can also, when I explain them out, I can look at these steps through different types of theories as well. And for preparation and gathering material, I like to look at them through Panayotis Kokoras and his understanding of fabrication, sound synthesis, which means that this is the practice that has been done already since the very beginning of electroacoustic and acousmatic music, where you kind of create different kind of energy articulations by recording yourself doing different things with objects or instruments or guided improvisations and so on. So these are the points that I can look through this theoretical lens. And then in the spectromorphology or transformation and organization, these are parts that I can look through spectromorphology and also the extension of spectromorphology and its language done by Norwegian composer Lasse Thoresen. And organization and spatialization, these are the 2 steps that I like to look at through Laban movement analysis, and also spatial sonorous object, which was initially by Norwegian Rolf Inge Godoy, made very extensive studies on this kind of extension of Schaeffer's idea of sound object, that we would have like a object that also includes the spatial information, and then it's taken forward with Catena here, also with the spatial sonorous object. I will not talk about ambisonics very much, but this is the technological method also that I'm using in my work. In my first case study, this was a piece called Diagonals. The most essential kind of idea in this piece was the idea of a kinesphere. So this means that the space around your body, which can be reached with extending your limb from one point. And this became the kind of central idea of spatializing the perspective of your spatialization of sound objects. And what I wanted to do is that when Laban has defined 8 different kind of short actions for different types of movements, like that you have a direct and a very fast movement, or you have a slow and indirect movement. And he called them effort actions in his effort theory. And then he superimposed this kind of form of a cube within these different kind of effort actions. So you have different kind of efforts put to different corners of the cube. And this was kind of a map for me to work with the sound objects. Because this kind of diagonal scale was forming, it made 4 different kind of trajectories that were all crossing in the center of the cube. And this became very interesting also from the ambisonic point of view when you are working with these tools. So the sensation of proximity and comes it puts it to the test, so to say. But it's very apparent from the pictures also that way it's nice to experiment with that diagonal scale. Here's a little piece of the binaural clip of the piece Diagonals. Also there's a QR code if somebody wants to listen later with headphones. But maybe we have time to listen to a little clip. Case study number 2, what I have is a zoetrope. It's a new composition that I'm still, at the moment, I'm finishing up at the moment. And here the process was so that I had 2 dancers that I was working with. And I started the process by making material that I wanted to use in my composition and recording these kind of longer compound sound patterns that were kind of textural in their nature. And then we were taking this kind of 10-15 minute takes of where the dancers were reacting to these materials. And those were filmed from 2 different kind of angles, these movement sessions. And then after that I was wondering that how will I then use this kind of material in my composition. So I ended up making like a screen dance edit almost. So I have a 9-10 minute, this kind of dance film almost. And then I'm revisiting the sound transformation and the sound process also with this dance video. And then eventually spatializing and using the movement reactions as sort of inspirations for the spatialization. Here's a little clip of that. And maybe what I'm unpacking at the moment as sort of findings within this project, what I'm interested in, because I'm not so much, or I'm not suggesting this kind of universal method or universal, that this kind of sound is connected always to this kind of movement. But it becomes more of interest in trying to articulate that what kind of knowing occurs in the moment when I watch the dancer react to this kind of compound sound pattern. And if I respond with a certain kind of sound movements within that session, and that feels right, so what kind of knowing is that? And possibly also when we have this kind of idea of spatial sonorous object, that how do we create them? And this is maybe this kind of experimental, interdisciplinary way to create these objects. And also something that came more directly in the process itself was also that the movements actually defined the form of the piece themselves. And why this is like a contribution to better understanding of the perceived movement of sound as a meaningful compositional parameter and form building element within the technologically saturated field of electroacoustic music research. And it also offers a conceptual model for thinking about spatialization through human movement, and hopefully also this is something that can give something to the discussion of perception of space and spatial sound experience. But that's it.